Nick Powell, a high school senior, had everything going for him. He was popular, smart, and had a bright future ahead. But deep down, he struggled with a feeling of emptiness, feeling disconnected from those around him, including his mother. One evening, after a tense argument with his mom, Nick walks out into the night, not realizing that this simple decision would alter the course of his life forever. In a moment of frustration, he encounters a group of strangers, led by a troubled girl named Annie. In a violent confrontation, Nick is attacked and left for dead. But something strange happens. Instead of dying, Nick finds himself in a surreal, ghostly state. He's still alive, but no one can see him, hear him, or feel his presence. He's invisible, trapped between life and death. Nick's new reality is one of confusion and fear. He wanders through his neighborhood, desperately trying to reach out to those around him, but they can't sense him at all. His mother, friends, and even the police can't detect his presence, and it's as though he no longer exists. Nick realizes that he is somehow stuck, not fully alive but not fully dead either. He is invisible to the world, and the only way to escape this limbo is to understand what has happened to him. As time passes, Nick learns that his attacker, Annie, is not just a random stranger but someone whose actions have tied their fates together in unexpected ways. He discovers that Annie, a troubled girl with a complicated past, is dealing with her own emotional scars, and that her life is just as broken as his own. Nick begins to piece together what happened on that fateful night. He learns about the trauma that Annie has endured, how her struggles with her past led her down a dangerous path. At first, he's angry and scared, unsure of how to confront her. But as Nick's journey unfolds, he starts to see that their lives are intertwined in a way he never imagined. He discovers that Annie wasn't acting out of malice but out of desperation, driven by her own feelings of hopelessness. The deeper Nick delves into Annie's troubled history, the more he understands about his own life, his regrets, and the guilt that weighs heavily on him. He realizes that the reason he's invisible is not just because of Annie's actions, but because of his own unresolved emotions and the guilt he carries for not fully living his life. Nick's existence as an invisible ghost becomes a journey of redemption. As he interacts with those he left behind, he begins to see the emotional wounds that have shaped them. He watches his mother, who is devastated by his disappearance, and his best friend, Pete, who is trying to hold on to the life they once had. Though Nick can't touch or speak to them, he sees their pain and understands how his own actions have contributed to their suffering. He watches as Annie's life spirals out of control, haunted by the past she can't escape. As the days pass, Nick realizes that his only chance to escape the invisible state he's in is to confront his past and help Annie find the redemption she desperately needs. Through his efforts, Nick and Annie begin to understand each other better. He watches as she struggles with her own guilt and pain, and slowly, they begin to connect in a way that neither of them expected. Nick, in his invisible state, starts to understand that healing doesn't just come from making things right with others but from facing the darkest parts of himself. As Nick and Annie's fates become more intertwined, Nick's existence as an invisible ghost becomes a metaphor for the emotional barriers he has built around himself. He learns that in order to truly move forward, he must help Annie confront her past and let go of the anger and regret that have defined her life. Through this, Nick finally begins to understand the significance of his near-death experience and what it means to truly live. As Nick's journey unfolds, he finds a renewed sense of purpose. He realizes that the only way he can return to the world of the living is to forgive himself and allow others, including Annie, to heal. His actions lead to a breakthrough, and in the end, the film offers a poignant message about the power of redemption, forgiveness, and the deep emotional connections that bind people together. But will Nick finally break free from his invisible state? Will he and Annie find the closure they need to move on with their lives? Only time will tell as their stories intertwined, and they face the difficult journey of healing and forgiveness. Nick's invisible world continues. He becomes more aware of his surroundings and the people in his life who are affected by his absence. His mother, still grieving the loss of her son, begins to unravel in her own way. Nick can see how deeply her pain runs, as she struggles with the guilt of not being there for him when he needed her the most. He watches as she tries to put on a brave face, yet her life is consumed with sorrow and confusion. This realization hits Nick hard. His mother's love for him was always there, but the distance between them in life left her unable to help him when he was falling apart. Now, as an invisible force, he can do nothing but watch as she suffers. In an attempt to reach out, Nick tries to communicate with Pete, his best friend, who is also struggling with the loss of his friend. Pete, consumed with confusion and fear, refuses to believe that Nick is truly gone. He keeps searching for answers, asking everyone around him about what happened that night. Though Pete can't hear Nick, their bond still lingers, and Nick feels an overwhelming sense of guilt. He never told Pete the things that mattered, how much their friendship meant and how much he wished he had opened up more. As Nick watches Pete trying to move on, he starts to understand that he has failed not only those closest to him but also himself. It's a painful lesson, but it's the one that pushes Nick towards his ultimate goal, to finally make amends. Meanwhile, Annie is also grappling with her own demons. As Nick follows her, invisible to her eyes, he learns about the troubled life she's led. She comes from a broken family, full of pain and emotional scars. The violent incident that led to Nick's near-death was the result of her own fractured sense of self. Annie never intended to hurt anyone, but the anger and hopelessness she felt overwhelmed her. As Nick watches her, he sees the vulnerability that she hides behind her tough exterior. She's a victim of her circumstances, and like him, she has spent much of her life running from her own feelings of guilt and shame. Nick, now understanding her pain, feels a deep empathy for her, and the anger he once felt towards her begins to fade. It's a turning point in his journey, where he starts to see that both he and Annie are in need of healing, and the path to redemption lies in forgiveness, not just for each other but for themselves. Nick's ethereal presence begins to take on a more active role in Annie's life. Though she can't see him, she starts to sense a presence, a whisper of something trying to connect with her. In moments of emotional vulnerability, she reaches out to Nick, as if she can feel him there, even though he is invisible. Through these interactions, Nick helps guide her towards the realization that her pain doesn't have to define her. She can let go of her past mistakes, just as he must let go of his own. Their bond, born from shared trauma, becomes a healing force that begins to unlock their potential for redemption. With each passing moment, Nick feels himself getting closer to returning to the world of the living, but he knows that it's not just about escaping his invisible state, it's about breaking free from the emotional prison he's created for himself. As Nick and Annie's paths cross in subtle ways, Nick starts to see his own life differently. His memories, his regrets, and his fears that once seemed insurmountable begin to lose their grip on him. He realizes that, even though he is invisible, his life still has meaning. He has the power to help others, to heal the wounds he left behind, and to forgive himself for the mistakes he made. This transformation is gradual, but with each step, Nick becomes more confident in his journey. He no longer sees himself as a victim of his circumstances, but as someone who can shape his own fate. He understands now that his invisibility is not just a curse, it's an opportunity to grow, to help others, and to finally find peace with the life he lived and the life he has yet to fully live. In a dramatic turn, Nick and Annie's shared journey culminates in a powerful confrontation with their pasts. They face their greatest fears, their deepest regrets, and their hidden guilt head-on. Nick, with Annie by his side, makes a final, desperate plea for forgiveness, not just from others, but from himself. The emotional intensity of this moment reaches a peak, as both characters come to terms with their past mistakes and the choices that led them to this point. As Nick lets go of the anger and sorrow that has kept him invisible, he feels himself begin to return to the world of the living. It's a painful but freeing process, and as he finally steps back into the light, he knows that his journey is not over, but just beginning. The final scenes are filled with emotion and resolution. Nick's return to the world is not just about reclaiming his life but about understanding what it truly means to live with purpose, to forgive, and to heal. As he and Annie part ways, they both carry the lessons they've learned from their experiences. Nick's near-death journey has shown him the power of redemption, and as he moves forward, he understands that life is not just about the moments we have, but the relationships we build, the mistakes we own, and the forgiveness we offer. Nick's journey of transformation reaches its final chapter as he steps into the light, finally free from the invisible state that once trapped him between life and death. With the emotional weight of his past lifted, he reconnects with the people who mattered most: his mother, his best friend Pete, and even Annie. He realizes that while life may never be perfect, the key to true living lies in understanding, forgiving, and embracing the people around us, including ourselves. The journey wasn't just about escaping invisibility, it was about facing the truth of who he was, who he could be, and what it truly means to live. As Nick finds closure, he and Annie part ways, each walking away with the wisdom that only comes from confronting their deepest fears and regrets. For Nick, the road ahead is still uncertain, but he now walks it with a renewed sense of purpose. No longer invisible, he's free to live fully, understanding that the greatest redemption comes from embracing the light, even in the darkest of times. The story of the invisible teaches us that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds. It reminds us that sometimes, we must lose ourselves to truly find who we are meant to be. Nick's journey shows us that it's never too late to change, to make things right, and to live a life that's not defined by the past, but by the choices we make to build a better future. Thank you for watching this recap of The Invisible, 2007. If you enjoyed the story and want more in-depth movie recaps, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss out on new content. Stay tuned for more thrilling stories, deep dives into your favorite films, and plenty of cinematic experiences. See you in the next video.